Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's story, an entitled neighbor Karen repeatedly trespassed on my property and damaged my land. I got epic revenge and embarrassed her. Here is what happened. Subscribe to Ripe on YouTube and hit the bell to turn on notifications. I have always heard stories about the Karens and what they are capable of, but I truly had no idea that they could do what my neighbor Karen did. We will give her that name for simplicity, alright? Anyways, my wife Claire and I own a large piece of land. In total, it is about 21 acres. She inherited it from her family and it is truly a blessing of a place. Not only do we have an incredible view of the sun rising over the distant mountains, but it is genuinely the most peaceful spot I've ever been. A little over a half mile from our home, there is a deeply wooded area. It is still our property. Her uncle AJ, who owned the home before we inherited it, had spent more than a decade building a series of mountain biking trails throughout. I'm not talking about some basic path to ride on, I am talking about wooden bridges, drop-offs, ramps, jumps and buried logs for hopping. It seriously was pretty elaborate and well done. He was always really proud of it, and when they would hold their annual family reunions, the grandkids, nieces and nephews would spend all of their time there. It's a place that my wife holds dear in her memories from when she was a child. After my wife's uncle passed away and we took on the upkeep of this huge piece of property, we asked the neighbors that would ride on the trails to help us maintain them. There were about a half a dozen families within proximity of our property that would come on a regular basis to ride the mountain biking trails. Everyone was happy to help and they were always so polite about asking for permission before going onto the property. We rarely went biking anymore, but my wife decided that it was a nice day and she wanted to go out and hit the trails for the first time in months. As we were riding through the field, heading to the small cove that marked the entrance to the trails, we noticed there was an SUV parked some distance from the front. We thought it was a little odd since none of the neighbors had asked to use the trail today, everyone had our number and would just text us when they wanted to go biking. As we got closer, we could see that the old sign Uncle AJ had made that said AJ's family trail, remember to love nature and keep our home clean, was missing. The sign was old and falling apart some, but it didn't appear like it had just fallen off. It was nowhere to be seen. Claire assumed that maybe some animals moved it into the bush and we continued onto the trail. We started off light and only biked on the easy little bunny trail since it had been a while. But as we grew more comfortable, Claire wanted to see her old favorite spot, which the kids called the Devil's Ridge, since it was a tougher trail with very narrow areas that dropped off on the side. Past the ridge there was another area with the wooden bridge with some ramps and steep drop-downs for the more experienced riders. As we finally made our way to the Devil's Ridge, we could start to hear voices. It sounded like a man and a woman. We approached and watched them from the top of the ridge for a moment. It was a man and woman that neither of us had ever seen or met before. They had several shovels, wheelbarrows and other yard care equipment with them. And they had even put up a sign that said, "Reserved for Karen and her family." As we observed them, we noticed that they had done a number on the old Devil's Ridge trail. There were no longer any large ramps or logs and the bridge had been completely removed. The ridge was no longer a ridge and had tons of dirt built up around the side to make it wider. A young teen around the age of 14 or 15 was riding some kind of an ATV around the trail in a boring circle. The coolness of what was once Devil's Ridge completely gone. Not to mention the ATV was going to destroy the trail even more than they already had, and they had two full-sized ones sitting a few feet away. It was obvious that they were designing the area so they could use their stupid quad bikes. For a moment, Claire was speechless as she looked around at what had once been her favorite riding spot, so I spoke up. "Hey there, how can we help you?" I called out to them, catching them off guard. I rode my bike down the only drop that was still there, stopping a few feet away from them. The woman was immediately defensive and not even saying hello back. "The question really is, can we help you?" she said. I was unsure how to answer as most people have common courtesy, but not this woman, so we will call her Karen. "Pardon?" My face probably gave away how confused I was. How can we help you? You're the one trespassing. The smug expression on her face caused my relatively chill demeanor to crumble pretty quickly. I laughed, feeling like this cannot be real. Who the hell is this woman and why is she talking to us like this? Trespassing? Ma'am, do you know where you are? Right now? Her husband shook his head, apparently in disbelief that they had to explain themselves. This is our trail. We've been working on it for months and you're trespassing. Do I need to call the police? Again, at this point I am too stunned to think of what to say next. These are easily the most entitled people I have ever met. My wife had heard enough and came rushing down the hill on her bike, stopping mere inches from Karen. Police? She said with a high-pitched voice, which inevitably meant that she was really pissed. How dare you? This is my property and you cannot just be out here tearing up my trails. Karen's husband jumped in and put himself between the two women, which is of course when the woman decides to act tough. Claire shouted at her to leave or we would be the ones calling the police. It seemed like they may have gotten the hint at the look of pure rage that was etched across my wife's face. Karen and her husband started to back off, but the woman continued to say that they would be back there and there was nothing she could do about it. Claire was shaking with anger, but I insisted that we leave and head back to the house to avoid any trouble. But I also reassured her that we would not let these entitled pricks get away with it. It was from there that we decided not to call the police, but to put up some wildlife cameras and rig the trails to break their stupid ATVs. We also sent out a text to the neighbors saying to avoid the Devil's Ridge Trail until further notice. Thankfully, I grew up with 4 older brothers and have gotten pretty good at setting up booby traps and pranks. The first thing we did was hammer over 3 dozen nails into a thin piece of wood and buried it under the dirt where they spent the most time riding their boring merry-go-round trail. Then we destroyed the integrity of the widened path so that the sides would crumble as their tires tried to drive across it. And finally, the last thing we did was put up a series of barbed wire near the front and tied the stupid "reserved for Karen and her family" to it with a big spray-painted X over it. Basically anywhere they could access the trail, we put up barbed wire. We knew that they could remove it, but it wouldn't be easy. Claire and I waited for the cameras to go off, telling us that the Karen Brigade arrived on the trail. It was about a week and they finally came back. Karen screamed and shouted about the barbed wire, talking crap about how she would end up calling the police, but her husband can be heard saying that they don't own it and at least he seems relatively intelligent. After they removed the barbed wire barrier, Karen rolled down the hill only to run over the board of nails. She curses and her husband passes her, hitting the softened sides and tipping over. Their son was not with them that day. The 2 adults defeatedly pushed their vehicles back up the hill to their cars and never to be seen on our trails again. And yeah guys, I'm curious, if someone tried to trespass on your property like the people in this video, what would you have done? Let us know in the comments, and now let's continue with the next one. The next one is titled, I Ruined Someone's Career. A little backstory, I work online as an artist and this took place when I was in roughly my early 20s. There was a popular artist who calls himself a professional and works in the industries. I used to look up to him, let's call him Daniel. Lately, I noticed how Daniel's art looked eerily too familiar to a piece of media I have seen before. So, I looked up the images and found that it matched up to his art. He was directly referencing official art and profiting off of it by selling it on his print shops online. He did not make any effort to make the reference detaches from the original piece. I confronted him about it, sending a detailed message not to do that and the possible consequences. I have seen artists in real life who are sued over $100,000 and to the extent in jail for doing what he did. Instead of being professional and mature about it, he lashed out at me and took it to social media, telling me how I was wrong to falsely accuse him since artists use references and how I could get sued for libel. I was dumbfounded at how clueless he was, not comprehending what I was talking about. He included my username, which my blogs had links to my contacts, my emails, Facebook page, art accounts and Instagram. His fans, including his group of friends, joined in sending me downright horrific messages to me. I had panic attacks resulting from the pure backlash of his enormous fanbase. I constantly received hate mail telling me how horrible of a person I am, how crappy my art was, and to the extent of death threats for almost an entire month. The last straw that broke the camel's back was when he directly referenced off of my art and made money off of it. I didn't know how to find a lawyer, and I feel hopeless and angry that I could not do anything about it. Later it hit me, if I cannot do it, then maybe another artist can, or anyone who holds the copyright. The last I remember, Daniel never credited any of these artists for his references. I looked into the art he referenced and examined each official company matching Daniel's art. I used Google search to find anyone working for said company, and voila, I found a staff member for a different branch in a different continent. Let's call him Cody. I contacted Cody's Facebook and tipped him about Daniel's activity through Messenger. I uploaded and sent a copy of their art and Daniel's art for comparison. Cody just simply replied, "We'll contact our legal team. Thanks for the notice." Another week passes by, and during the time he constantly posts to every damn thing I post about in my art blog. And then there was silence. I checked his print shop, which was removed. His response to my message was taken down from his social media. He stops talking to his friends publicly. Days later, a fan was asking about him, and he responded how he is no longer friends with them because they are very toxic hypocrites. One of his former group of friends contacted my friend and cried about how awful of a bully he was, and of course, my friend did not care. It was the most glorifying feeling I have ever rejoiced. This would have been avoided if he at least heeded my warnings. How he handled the situation was not professional at all. About 5 years later, I had been informed that apparently he has a tough time getting back into the industry after there were allegations of his past copyright infringement. The biggest one was having a lawsuit with the big company Cody worked for. And yeah guys, art theft is definitely no joke and a very common thing nowadays. And by the way, I know that some of you sometimes ask how I do my thumbnails, and I actually do them all by myself. And I have multiple subscriptions to image websites that provide all the professional photos I need to create my thumbnails. This is actually quite expensive for me on a monthly basis, but at least I 100% know that I am allowed to use the pictures I have in my thumbnails. The next one is titled Revenge on the Postal Office. UPS smashed a nearly new MacBook that I sent with them. I asked them nicely to pay me back for it, and they asked about blaming me, blaming my packaging, saying it was impossible that they damaged it, etc. I was able to prove my packaging was flawless and get a statement from the Apple shop that I took it to say it was damage caused by being dropped or thrown. I could also prove it worked when I sent it. They were not too interested and messed me about for weeks, sending me from pillar to post, even threatening to make me pay interest on custom charges, which I was not liable for as the laptop was smashed on arrival and thus worthless at import. I took it to small claims. They hired a lawyer who sent me letters saying they contested it and would go for full fees, etc. if I lost it. I went for it anyway. I did law stuff in university, so I knew the basics, and I thought my case was pretty clear cut. So, I won. I won my costs back plus extra plus interest. They ignored the court order and did not pay. Now, this laptop was originally being sent to my beloved mother-in-law. She asked me to help her with the problem as apps were also seriously harassing her for the customs fee. However, very unexpectedly, before I could resolve it, she passed away. It was the last thing she ever asked me to do for her, and I loved that woman more than pretty much any human on this planet. She was my mother, my best friend and my mentor. Taking down UPS was now my personal vendetta. I researched my options. I could have taken the usual, more conservative legal routes to reclaim my money, but no, F them. I don't care about the money anymore. I want revenge, I want drama, I want karmic justice. I went to the High Court. I got a writ of control. I of course added on more fees and more interest. I then hired the most aggressive bailiff firm in London. I trusted that the crappy processes and attitude of UPS to mean that they would ignore the letters and actually get a visit. And they did. The bailiffs rock up at UPS headquarters and explain the situation. UPS refuses to pay, so the bailiffs start listing goods. Security try to make them leave, the office manager tries to bully them out. Obviously, no craps are given by the bailiffs and they crack on with their jobs. I was not allowed the body cam footage, but they did send me a detailed report. The final conclusion is copied from it below. Calls were then made to the accounts manager, who arrived in a hurry. As no payment was forthcoming from them, the agent again explained the removal process and costs involved and called the office for approval to begin removals. The agent began to seize assets. The finance director then arrived on the scene. He was not at all happy about the attendance, but ultimately agreed to pay a voluntary payment in full from his personal account in order to stop the removal. I know it is a drop in the ocean to UPS, but I got more than double what I originally asked for to replace the laptops. They would have had to pay even more on top in fees to the bailiffs. I reckon it cost them at least 3 times more than the original claim in the end. But mostly, I just enjoy the mental image of the flustered finance director and his impotent rage having to pay his own money to stop the heavies taking desktop computers and fancy pot plants and things out of their swanky head office lobby. And yeah guys, I would have never thought that we ever see a story about someone getting revenge on UPS. It kind of reminds me of the times when you order something on Amazon, they send you the wrong thing, then you ask them if you should return it and they just say, never mind, you can just keep it, it's not worth the trouble. The next one is titled, I guess I'll do what you say. I went to a nice Caribbean island with most of my family. My uncle and his wife saw this trip as a second honeymoon and got wasted since day one, which would be okay if they had not brought their 8-year-old son with them. The second day of the trip, my little cousin goes straight to the deepest side of the pool with the full intention of jumping, and mind you, he does not know how to swim and did not have floaties. Noticing his parents were too busy chugging free mojitos, I grabbed him by the arm before he jumped and started telling him it is dangerous to do that, and he should remain in the kids' pool. He starts crying and his mother goes berserk, yelling to me that I have no right to scold or touch her kid, and to stay away from him for the rest of the trip, or else she won't hesitate to slap me for abusing her kid. I obliged, and on day 3, when we were about to leave the hotel, the kid came running past me and knocked over what seemed to be 2 fancy statues placed on a coffee table at the hotel's reception, and of course everyone noticed and they had to pay for the damage. Later that night, he also broke a plate on a restaurant. He was sitting beside me, but you know, I got strict orders not to interfere. And Ripe Stars, I don't know about you, but actually when I pay attention to it, I realize that I engage in more malicious compliance in everyday life than I thought is actually possible. I don't know about you, maybe that's just a part of my character. And the next one is titled, HOA shuts down snow cone truck in our front yard, Karen flips her lid and the neighborhood hates us. So, as you all know, Mr. Virus 19 is making his way around the world. We should all be practicing social distancing, stay inside, etc. Well, this afternoon I look outside my bedroom window and find a snow cone truck in our front yard. Literally, in our yard. I told my dad and he was kind of pissed off. But oh well. Not like he could do anything. I went to go clear my head and went for a drive around town. When I got back, there was an insane amount of children with their parents in our yard. I could barely get into our driveway. I took my dad to our neighborhood dock to check the tide to see if it would be a good time to go kayaking. It was, so we went back home again to an insane crowd of Jeremy children. We noticed a work truck from the HOA parked next to the snow cone truck, and my dad rolled his windows down and asked if he was shutting it down. He said yes. We pulled the truck out to load the kayaks and we overheard the new commotions. Miss Karens and her gremlins were yelling at the officer and the snow cone man. I would like to clarify at this point in the story that we live in a gated community. There are strict rules as to who can enter and when. The HOA provides contracting barcodes to get in with, and Mr. Snowcone must have had one. One major rule is, if you're going to cater or host any distracting events that may mess with the flow of traffic, you have to give notice or seek approval from the HOA office first. This man did not get approval and therefore was being shut down, especially because of the state of the world currently. Karen continues to yell and looks over at me and Dad, and she goes,
"They just shut us down because they are mad you're in their yard. We are just trying to get some ice cream, and it's not fair that people have already gotten some before us, and now we cannot."
And we literally never did anything to aid in the shutting down of the operation. I could not hear exactly what the HOA officer said, but it was something to the effect of, "Ma'am, this crowd is not practicing social distancing. There are too many people here risking the safety of everyone. We also never issued any approval for this man to set up here. He must leave." We continued to load the kayaks as all the Karens and Susans shot daggers in our direction. I'm pretty sure I even heard one use the typical line of,
"It is okay, dear. The mean man who won't let you get ice cream won't stop us."
As the man was packing up. There was at least 4 moms still waiting as the guy was shutting down. When the guy finally got in his truck to pull away, an older couple walked up and asked if he was done for the day. They were very sweet and I actually kind of felt bad for them, but just them, no one else. The man goes, "Yeah, we are done unfortunately." And in a very snarky tone goes, "The officer yelled at us and said we were not practicing social distancing even though we were. So now the fun is ruined and I have to go." And again looked at me and my dad as if we had anything to do with it. Long story short, half the neighborhood hates us for no reason and there's a very good chance they are gonna get sick soon. This is not part of the story but just a PSA. My father is a doctor and he has to work through this mess. He is risking infection every day to save the lives of people like our neighbors who don't know the magnitude of the situation. If people would take stay-at-home orders more seriously and actually practice good safety and not participate in things like this, the disease would plateau. Please just stay inside for 2 measly weeks and prevent further infection.